All right, thanks, Scott. Okay, we are going to reconvene our meeting, our special workshop for May 17, 2021. First would be, do I have a motion to approve the consent agenda items? Do I have- Any further discussion? All in favor?
Aye.
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 Opposed? All right. And on to information and action items. First up, strategic implementation timeline. And I'll turn over to Dr. Cook.
Thank you, Chair Brumley. As you remember, we targeted this summer to do kind of a what's it going to look like for the next couple of years as we roll out our strategic plan. And I can tell you that squad back in the corner, we call them the instructional core, and they kind of all, and Katie sitting right in the middle of them. She has like her input to them. She really just says one thing, and that's stop spending money. But that group has been convening together to kind of work out the detail of what we'd be focusing on for the next couple of years. And so I think they're going to tag team this. I don't know who's going to actually be the start of this, but Kate, Dr. Rusko will be the starting point. And then we've actually built a pretty detailed timeline, as you can see in your board book, as to what things need to be focused on and would be the kind of, as in 3 years or 2 years, as we do check-ins, the things that we should be watching for to see how those implementations are going and whether or not they're having the desired impact. So I'm going to turn it over to Dr. Orozco at this point.
Am I on? Yeah, I am. Good evening. Is it evening, afternoon? Good something. Thanks, everybody. So True Confessions is that we all thought we'd get here and that we'd have lots of hard copies for ourselves, and nobody made any. So we're we're going to see how well we know it by heart. What we wanted to describe was what my job was, and we all agreed this morning that brevity would be key in this entire presentation, so we'll see how we do. But we wanted to first talk about the fact that this year, during the pandemic, one of the things that we were quite aware of was that our strategic plan would be words on a page and a lot of good ideas, an excellent articulation of our beliefs, and that's all it would be unless we could get to work as a team describing how that was going to translate to classrooms. And so this strategic plan implementation timeline is our attempt to describe for ourselves and for our leaders and for our teachers and our community what are the kinds of steps that we can take as a collection of schools, as a unit, that we can take together, and what are those sort of benchmarks that we can hold ourselves accountable to over the next several years, so that even June 2026, which we believe many of these ideas will shift, but at that time we can look around ourselves and say, the way back when, the curriculum audit that uncovered so many areas of our system that needed our attention, that we've paid attention to those findings, that we've given ourselves the time and energy and resources to articulate how do we fix those and improve life for kids and teachers, and then what are those steps that we're going to take along the way? And so, therefore, the strategic plan implementation timeline. And one of the things that's not so obvious, I think, when you look at that timeline for ourselves, what we decided to do, I think Jen and Rebecca, when you were with the L for L, we were looking at that, and it felt like this really long kind of accordion kind of booklet. And one of the things that for several of us did is we needed to see it kind of going this way so that we could look across from now until June 2026 and actually say, what are we holding ourselves accountable year by year? What are those lines? And so and that has helped us. But what we also describe for ourselves is kind of above the line and below the line work. And when we say above the line, what we're talking about is the portrait of a graduate, those indicators that tell us when we go into classrooms, what are the ways in which we can see children, students, adults working and learning that tell us with clear evidence that our students are on a trajectory to become that graduate that we've described in the portrait of a graduate. that work continues. We have a team working on developing those indicators right now. Above the line also is the learning conditions, the teaching framework, the instructional framework. And I want to linger here because I believe you in the timeline. Am I correct? You have, it's color coded. Do you have that? So the teaching framework, and we say that yellow band in the timeline are those things that we are very explicit about what we need to see in all of our schools as we move ourselves across that continuum, across the timeline. And so the learning conditions that are described there, I want to spend some time talking about that in a second, but that's all above the line. Those are the things that we expect when we walk into classrooms, when we walk into schools, when we listen into collaboration sessions, when we hear leaders and teachers speaking together. Those are the things where we expect to see different language, different learning design, different professional development, right? All in service of the teaching framework, those 6 kind of conditions in the teaching framework that we describe. Below the line, some friends of mine, I think the people who drew the short straw, they'll be coming up and kind of talking a little more about the below the line, the drivers, the resources, the planning. I think that it was reassuring to our principals, to all of our school administrators. Deanne can tell me if it was or if it wasn't, but I think it was reassuring to our administrators in our schools when we said, when we look at drivers, resources, and planning, that's as much about us turning as a district team, supporting our teams and saying, these are the things that we have to work hard at to come alongside you to offer you support in those areas so that the things in that yellow band can happen. If you'll allow me, I'll give you an example from this morning. This morning we watched we watched a first grade teacher host a teaching lab, and Steve was there, and we were watching a first grade teacher describe to some 6-year-olds the kinds of inferences that they were making when they were looking at she was doing a read aloud with the kids. And the story was a story about a child who had decided that he was going to jump off of a diving board, looked like a pretty darn high diving board. And the child was debating with himself about whether to climb the ladder or not and jump. And she, of course, stopped in the middle of the story, so the kids don't know what's going to happen yet. But I'm bringing that up because what she did in that story was she asked them to share their inferences about what that kid was thinking. You know, she said, it doesn't say here he was scared. Why do you think he's scared? And these 6-year-olds are scratching their, well, you wouldn't climb back down the ladder if you weren't scared. You'd get up and you'd jump. And one child said, I have a connection to that. You know, my life is, it was like when I climbed a bunch of ropes, I thought I was going to fall off and die. I was scared. And they're describing, and she just seamlessly brings into the conversation, and how do you think he felt? So would that be, was he in the green zone or the yellow zone or the red zone? Where do you think he was emotionally? And they're talking through that and they're making sense of it. And she's having them beforehand get calm. And what was so evident was that those drivers, those skills that the kids had been working on for some time now were just a part of the conversation about thinking and learning. And that's, I think, a kind of a metaphor for how we see the timeline. We see all of that work being integrated into the teaching and learning and leadership. So all that to say, essentially, in the learning conditions, essentially by June of 2022, there are just really 3 main goals for schools, and those goals are found in yellow. There are those 3 bullets that you would see in the timeline. The first one is that there's evidence of elements of the teaching framework in classrooms. It doesn't say how many classrooms specifically, it doesn't say what percentage, and it doesn't say what's the evidence, because our school leadership teams are designing for themselves and for us in their school learning plans. How are we going to know? What's real evidence that tells us that the teaching framework conditions are alive and well in our classrooms? What percentage would tell us that we're on the road to some success? Because that next year, things are much more dialed in. That next year it says clear evidence that all teachers and their students are operating at level 2, right? So in other words, we're taking our learners, our adult learners, our schools, and ourselves kind of where we are, and we're moving along, and we're recognizing that people aren't in the same place, that some have been at this work a lot longer. The second one is that professional language. We know that language tells us what the culture is. What just like those kids today, those 6-year-olds were using the language of inference and emotion and regulation. That was the language they were using because that's what they were taught and that's what they know. It's our expectation that the professional language of our teachers and our leaders will be language about the teaching framework, and we'll hear that. So how do you integrate language like that? How do adults talk about that? That's part also for the teacher leadership teams to figure out, to describe. They have us as assistants to help them. They have, we kind of call it our Bible, the Phenomenal Teaching book, which has the teaching framework at its core. So that will be the second goal, is that because we know language as evidence of culture. And last but not least, that our students will start to see the connection between the portrait of a graduate, those skills and dispositions, and how they're learning in classrooms. And they can talk in a language that describes both. So for instance, I think we know that one of the teaching framework, and I think we've mentioned this to the board before, we know one of the teaching framework dimensions is building community. And the good design around teaching and learning has to establish what community looks like. And we know that that requires collaboration and it requires strong communication. So our kids should be able to, if our teachers are designing learning with community in mind, for example, which is teaching framework, our kids should be able to tell us whether or not they're collaborating, whether or not how they're communicating, and we should see evidence of that. I think today I was in another teaching lab. I was sharing with Rebecca, I was at Sorensen this afternoon in another teaching lab, and the kids were using the teaching framework rubric, and they were using a modified version of it because some kids in another school had taken the framework and had, with their teachers, changed it into student language. Students will be doing this, because that helped the students be able to help evaluate for their teachers whether or not their learning was effective. And so that teaching framework, which had been turned into student language, was now surfacing in another classroom in another school, and it was all in student language that they had written. So when that becomes a part of our language, and when our kids start to see those connections, we'll feel like we're on our way and that we're meeting our goals in the strategic timeline. I think that was my job. Just somebody else is up.
Dr. Roscoe, before you leave, can you real quickly define the difference between above the line and below the line, and why that the entire timeline is laid out in that fashion?
Yeah. So above the line, for one thing, it offers some reassurance to people, because when you look at this timeline, it just feels overwhelming. If being a leader in a school and you see the drivers, the resources, the planning, the learning, it feels like a lot. The part where we're really focusing, where we can see evidence of the shifts in practice that we're making, where we recognize that we're making true change. We're not just tweaking our way to excellence, right? We're making true change. That's above the line. That's learning conditions and student outcomes. So those are the things above the line that we see leaders, in teachers, staff members. Those are the things that are happening in the schools. School learning plans are focusing primarily this year on the above the line work. How do we get the language integrated? How does our professional development reflect our understanding of the teaching framework? How are we going to learn from each other by getting into one another's classrooms and watching and dissecting and analyzing? How are those things going to happen? Below the line is the work that the people who are sitting here in the corner, and others, that's the work that we're all doing to come alongside our people and help them understand and grow in their knowledge of all those things that support that work. And they're going to do a better job than I just did.
Good early evening, board and Chair Brumley and Dr. Cook. We all agreed that Kate could talk about the past, about the preparation, but that because she's leaving, she's not allowed to talk about the future. And so I just wanted to touch base with you guys a little bit about how excited we are really to do this. I know that this board shares the same sense of urgency about education and about our kids as we do, and how Dr. Cook has helped me at least sort of embrace this mantra of this is supposed to take time. This is supposed to take time because you just want to overnight change everything. And so what I appreciate and what I've been in conversation with administrators about appreciating here is that it's articulated and they can look and see something tangible, that there's a lot of flexibility here, but there's also some deadlines. There's also some things that we expect to happen that we can hold ourselves accountable to. And so after our first meeting that Chair Brumley and Trustee Smith were able to join us for, we had, I think it was kind of the inspiration, like, we've got this, we can do this, and here's what it kind of looks like, chew on it. And then we came back a second time with those plans and with the templates and really talked about how are we going to make this template, how are we going to make it so that the things that we value and are holding ourselves accountable to, that it can shine in this and that we can share this and that we can have conversations around it. And then in June, I think right mid-June, we will have meetings where, again, we come together and learn together and hear these plans presented. We can give some good questions. We can give some feedback. We can refine those. We really want this to be a shared process because it is so new. We haven't done a timeline like this. At least I asked Mike, and he's been here for a long time. Be careful. A long time, that this is new for all of us, and so we want to be responsive. And so above the line has some opportunities for gradual release, like Dr. Orozco said. Some of our schools are looking at this saying, where do I really raise the bar? How do I dig deeper on these components? And how do I get my staff, like, we're doing really well with community. I want it to be intentional and flow through the whole hour or through the whole day. And so we're ratcheting up, and then others are just starting to implement these things. So we felt like our goals were manageable, but still ambitious, because we do want to move forward and we do want to have that progress and we do want to celebrate together. Below the line, as Kate already described, we want to be flexible. We want those plans to tell us what we need to do to support the school. So it's not the district is saying, thou shalt now, blah, blah, blah. We've set some parameters, but what I've enjoyed about the conversations with schools so far is that they are deciding what they want from us and what they need from us. And a lot of it is the things we might have predicted, but there's been some really important aha moments and some ways that we can come in. And I know that as we start to implement these plans, our work is going to evolve as we respond to the needs of each building, which is super authentic and really exciting. You got it?
I've got a question, probably for Dr. Cook or maybe for the team here, but without those thou shalt do's, how do you end up with continuity and equity in the practice, right? Because it was maybe the Futures Audit, I think, that said we're a district of schools, not a school district, right? And so if we're letting everyone kind of do their own thing or create their own model of it or their own plans, how do we address that issue?
So that's the driver for that conversation is the fact that these outcomes are what are non-negotiables, right? The outcomes of the portrait of a graduate are non-negotiables. And those alignments are to the board-approved components of the strategic plan. So when a school takes on, and what's the acronym we're going to choose to use? School Learning Plan? Is that what it is? SLP. So each school builds a school learning plan on how they're going to get from point A to point B on all those things. They get to set some of those expectations, but they don't get to say, well, we're not going to do any of this stuff. We're going to go use Marzano's things or whatever. They're accountable to the board approved strategic plan. And so while we would want Deanne to say, here's how we feel like that would be best served at Lake City High School, Libby would say, with her feedback from her leadership team, here's how we feel like that would be best served. So it's kind of a tight, loose model in that the expectations are that you get there, and we're going to provide you the authority to make those decisions at the building level. But the level of expectation is that every kid is getting access to that portrait of a graduate. So it's not thou shalt. That's not true. It is thou shalt get there. It is not thou shalt get there by turning left on this street, turning right on that street.
Yeah, I appreciate that. The tight loose is language that we've been using a lot. There are some non-negotiables, but then we want to help you address your community of staff and of parents and of students in ways that make sense for you. So we're here for that. And also underneath, we've got, in our responsibilities, we've got a number of things that will drive us toward that portrait of a graduate. And one is MTSS. That's been common across the buildings, that they want to come closer in that. So when students transfer, or so that they feel like those are really effective, that will help us continually look at each and every student, make sure we're doing right by those kids, which will inform their plans as well.
I have just a silly question. We don't have the document up there, but there's a red line between 2023 and 2024. Is there a reason for that red line? Is it like pre and post, or
I have
that
it
like a
memorized.
landmark?
I'll
Yeah.
tell you what that, right? It's the chunk of time that we've asked them to address in their school learning plans so far. And so we wanted to give them a view. We wanted to give them the 20,000 foot view, or 10,000, but we really were just asking for them to make specific steps toward the next couple years.
Got it. And then in some of these, they talk about pilot K-12 students in each school. There's a couple different areas that talks about pilots. So are you guys going to be starting some of these initiatives on a smaller scale through a pilot? Is that correct?
Yes, I believe that's pertaining to mostly the student-led conferences. Is there anything else that's piloted? Which is
There was one about the
some assessments. And so, does anyone else want to speak to that? Because I have my understanding. Okay. Oh, here comes Dr. Nichols.
So we, instead of asking or ensuring that all students or all teachers comply at the same time, we've invited schools to start with small pilot groups to learn about their process and how it will best operate in their school in regards to a student-led conferencing experience, and peak assessments, portrait of a graduate indicators. So as those things develop, we've invited schools to start small and then replicate with their learning and how that will operate in their buildings. The non-negotiable is all students will have student-led conferences, K-12, over the next few years, but we'll start with that operation at a smaller level. So that's what that means.
Perfect. I think the only one that seemed really far down the road was the pilot K-12 in each high school. They'll graduate with an industry recognized certification, AP course, credit, college dual enrollment, and an internship. And that was going to start as a pilot, but that just seems far out. And then it was not until 2025 that every student would do that. Can you tell me your guys' thinking behind that?
Yeah, we have to do a lot of different shifts to our master schedules, which will take time. To ensure that every single student can have one of those options. So we have to determine what our high school schedule will be. Then we need to staff accordingly, figure out those expansive opportunities. Schools will develop their concentrations for students, and then we'll ensure that every single student will have an opportunity to have one or more of those outcomes.
I guess it is hard to want to wait for all of this, but I think that's 4 years of, that's a long time down the road for our students to see that those options available. So
yeah, well, and those things do happen now, right? But then it's just guaranteed that every student, no matter what. So, and yes, 4 years seems a long ways away, but as you know, we're scheduling and things, 2 years is tomorrow in some of those ways.
So I was wondering who ultimately does the oversight on this, meaning at the end of June of 2023, when we have those expectations, who is it that's going into the buildings and actually verifying and looking at that stuff? So when 2 years from now, the board had a question of whether that's actually happening, whose responsibility is that to make sure that's happening?
Yeah, well, we'll check in much more often. So we'll hopefully check in with schools every quarter to ensure where they are and if they need to update their plans or make adjustments on their plans. This entire instructional core team is there to support and ensure that they're able to meet all of their outcomes, whether they're selected outcomes or mandated outcomes. At the end of the day, it's a principal's responsibility to ensure that their school meets their measurements, and so then they would work with their supervisor around that. But the overall process of these plans are collaborative and supportive in structure, and we don't anticipate at 2023 that schools aren't making those goals because we would have seen that intervened much earlier.
And if I may add to that, I think one of the things I think that is really important for the board and the learning community to recognize, you, as a building principal, you're going to own this plan. This is your plan, and it's not done in a vacuum. You know, there's not a principal one that's going to write this on a weekend and say, here's what we're doing. They're going to do this collaboratively, and it's going to be a very transparent process. And so there's really no way to hide that. Now, it is iterative, and it is, you know, we make commitments, and we're going to fall short in certain areas, and we're going to exceed in certain areas. But that process on its own face value is highly transparent. And so if I say I'm going to lose 35 pounds in 1 year and I lose 15, and then that's on the webpage, then that's a public accounting. And so that's the commitment that you, if you want this kind of transformation over time, that's the most effective way to do that. And so it's not just the supervisor of the building principal that's going to be holding them accountable, or a team going into a building principal's building and say you're falling short. The first person who's going to know when they're falling short is the building principal, because it is a very transparent process. That plan, the whole part of this is making sure that plan lives and breathes over the 5 years or 10 years or whatever it is, so that that process lives out quite publicly.
Dr. Nichols, we had received earlier this spring, I believe, just kind of reports from secondary educators. Is that kind of an example of how we, as a board, would continue to get updates on kind of what's going on?
So the school learning plans, there's 2 templates, so for all K-12 schools. And then those plans will be submitted early June, and the schools will establish how they want to make those plans transparent. That's part of the template, is how are you communicating this and sharing this out. We hope to collect all of those and share those with the board. And then when we have an opportunity to revisit with each school and those quarterly benchmarks, we'll probably provide an overview report of here's where we are and checking in with each school and kind of their progress and celebrating the work that they're doing.
Kelly, I have another, just a details question. So this is on the planning section. So some of them are numbered, and this is under curriculum. Is that like the priority? So like number 1, you're going to do K-5 math, and then 3 is going to be K-5 ELA. Is that kind of?
Yeah, so that's in the curriculum cycle that Katie's running.
Seeing 2 different,
I know.
a yes and a no going at the same time.
You want to come up?
Katie, we need you at the mic if you're going to speak.
Katie will explain to you her curriculum development.
It's in 2 different columns. There's curriculum phases, and those are numbered, and then under all teachers operate within the curriculum tight loose.
Yeah, so all teachers need to be using curriculum within the tight loose framework. And here, I don't want to overspeak for Katie something.
So that numbering, Trustee May, that refers to what year they are on the curriculum cycle. So if you'll remember, like the first year is writing the curriculum, the second year is adoption of resources, the third year is aligning the resources and monitoring, and the fourth year is monitoring. So that would be where they fall within the cycle rather than prioritization. Mm-hmm.
If I look at the glossary, I think I know what most of the things and the acronyms are, but I'm not sure I know what making sense of your worth teacher training is. That seems, maybe I've missed it. I think I can identify the rest, but what is that?
I think that makes me up. Thank you, Trustee Smith. So making sense of your worth, it's called a training in this plan. It's really more of an opportunity. So what we know is that our teachers are tasked with working with students in a very human-centered way, right? And oftentimes building relationships, always building relationships with their students, with their colleagues. And so making sense of your worth is a curriculum that's centered around a program for teachers to have the opportunity to just spend some time learning about themselves, learning about their own strengths, making sense of their history, so that they can then work with students maybe in a way that is more meaningful for them and for the student. It is pretty specific around some of the data that we track, in that we know through research that secure strategies for relationship building are some of the most important things that we can offer to a student that maybe comes to us without secure strategies for relationship. And so we do track data in that way so that teachers have the opportunity to build those strategies and then give them right to their students when they're working with them. It is an opt-in. It is completely voluntary. It is just an opportunity that teachers can take advantage of, but is not a requirement. Any other questions? Okay, thank you.
All right. Any other questions? Okay. Well, thank you very much for the update and the information. And it certainly, it feels like it's starting to get real. Or maybe for some of you, it's already been really real for a while. But just to be able to see some benchmarks that are going to be coming up is obviously exciting for everyone. Okay, next on our information action is high school schedules.
Dr. Nichols is coming to the podium.
Okay. Well, since I'm a doctor now, you have to trust everything that I'm saying.
So ask your other how well that's worked.
That has not worked
Not
historically.
working is, oh man. Can I get my money back? Okay, so you asked for us to come with schedules, and we come today bearing schedules. So I'm excited to share with you where we are and what we hope to do moving forward with your blessing. So we have 2 schedule overviews that we want to share for focused feedback, and I share these with you. Not that the way that they're presented to you today are guaranteed to be the options that you would have presented to you for formal approval or adoption, but that these are 2 structures that our committee feels confident are able to meet our needs and could give us, and that we want to present them to our community for some significant focused stakeholder feedback that could help inform the possibilities for one or both of these schedules. And that we can present to you a much more comprehensive, detailed package for approval in the coming months or weeks or soon. So those 2 schedules are a 7-period modified block. The current model that we're moving forward with is a 3-block day model. As you can see, there's no collaboration scheduled in this. And we would have to make sure we would work out like start times and end times. So all of those details have not been configured at this time. This is just an overview model that's a 7-period modified block option. And the 7-period modified block option that we like the best was the one that had a 3-block day opportunity. So that's one option. Thank you.
Can I ask a question on
Yeah.
that one? When I looked at that one and looked at some of the comments kind of later in the key wonderings, I wondered, how does that work with K-Tech in particular? Because it seems like those courses are moving all around. And so my very basic understanding is you're either a kind of an AM or a PM student in our traditional schools or our comprehensive schools.
Yeah.
And the opposite at K-Tech. So.
Yeah. So as you know, Colby Matilla, who's the director of K-Tech, is part of our committee. He feels confident in the ability for students to be in K-Tech and in this option. It might not be like a very smooth transition, but it's not a smooth transition in our current context at CHS either, but it's still doable. He's also interested in looking at if we start really formalizing, and we are working on this on a whole other level, some real key partnerships with CTE Pathways, that there's opportunities for them to have a much more aligned schedule with both of our high schools on the same schedule. So just because of the way it operates now and the way we operate now doesn't mean that that's the way we would both operate as institutions moving forward if we were able to really solidify more of those comprehensive pathways and transitions for students into the K-Tech programs. But yes, it's not a smooth transition in the way that both schedules operate now. Any other questions on that? I'll get to other key wonderings and stuff, but if there's anything specific you want to talk through before. Okay. The other option is our 8-period AB block with an anchored day. Again, we don't know which exact day of the week that would be or how that would look. And again, we don't have a collaboration here, but this model provides anchored days. So there would be a similar, every day would be an A day or a B day instead of a rolling block. And then one day a week would provide students access to all 8 courses in one day. And so that was an AB block model that we're moving forward with, again, for focused feedback, and we'll see how that spans out, but this was that option that we have for the second option. And then, okay. So it's the key wonderings. There's a lot of wonderings. So this isn't like we didn't walk away from our meeting like, these are perfect, and we're so, like, it was not like that. But we are trying to make progress, and we think these are 2 good options that could really give us some context and feedback and design to really formalize into what we know is best for our community moving forward. But some key things that are standing out that we wanted to share with you as we share this out with the stakeholders is, one is that we have in our articles of agreement a daily planning period requirement. So right now, on the 8-period block, we run teachers teach 6 periods out of 8 periods. So that means it allows them a daily planning. In the modified block, we would have to do a 5 out of 7, or we would have to figure out a revisiting of our articles of agreement that would not allow for daily planning, and that would have to be a whole process through negotiations. So those are key wonderings, is the feasibility for a 5 out of 7, just like it's feasible right now for 6 out of 8, and then just making sure that teachers have daily planning time. We're also still trying to figure out this whole portrait of a graduate advisory component. Does it need to be a standalone period? Can these components be incorporated in instructional time and other courses? That's going to take a lot of detailed feedback from our staff and from our students about how they think that would best run. But what we do know, as you just heard from our previous presentation, is there's a lot of work on the dock around portrait of a graduate development, social emotional learning, student-led conferences. So if we have to be really intentional of how that's going to look and be experienced in our schedule. And then that question around, can we configure a 7-period with 4 classes for NIC and KTech? And how would we do that? And what are the best opportunities for us to do that? And then we have the practicality of lunch logistics. So just how we would work out lunch, knowing that both of our high schools are going to have a lot more students in the next couple of years, and just ensuring that we have the right logistics for all kids to eat and attend classes. So those are the ones that are really up on top. But again, there's a lot of other questions that we're using in addition to this.
I have a question on the prep one. Does it say uniform? I mean, I guess I know the answer to the question. It doesn't say uniform prep every day, correct?
Just has
it
to have
just says that there'll be a daily prep time every day. So couldn't that be built into a schedule as well? Like I don't know, on this day. There's
there's
something. There's a 40-minute planning period or whatever that starts the day.
Yeah, so there's different ways that we can configure planning to ensure that we meet our article requirements that might not be what we're used to seeing in traditional schedule contexts. And that stuff we'll be able to explore with our further feedback and exploration.
Kelly, can I just bring up too, Dr. Nelson brought up a really good kind of my wonderings, or whatever they were calling them, and I just thought it deserves a little bit of mention. And I think it was the credit, and I don't see it on these slides, but it was the total hours in semester per course or per credit. And we were just wondering, there's a big gap between these 2 schedules, and if there would be any way moving forward to narrow that gap. So right now, 7-period modified block, it looks like it's 95.12, and then the 8-period AB rollover block with an anchor day, it's 69.95. So that is a big difference per course in instructional hours. And I don't know, as we move forward in the community, how we could maybe bring those a little bit closer together. And this might be something good for the board to see too, this memorandum that went out. Dr. Nelson might have it, but he'd crunched the numbers for us, and I thought it was helpful.
Do you want him to put it on the screen?
Would the board like to see
Yeah,
it?
that would be helpful. I want to hear those numbers again.
It's not going to be broadcastable, but I can get it out here.
We can definitely look at the ways in which we can have more aligned instructional minutes, but I also want to unpack with this focus feedback and ways in which we would present a comprehensive package to you is how efficacy of using the time that we have. And so if there is a schedule that's that we present forward that might not be the most maximized of instructional minutes, I think we'll be confident about whatever these minutes incorporate are really quality minutes. Because as you know, you can have all kinds of minutes, but if they're not used well, it's not really worthy. And so just how we can best maximize the time and the structures of our schedules with whatever option that we hope to present to you soon.
Because one thing I guess I didn't notice comparing the two is that you actually lose instructional minutes per course going to that anchored block. So Dan, I think, kind of was mentioning this too, is that on their current block, they're at 72.57. So we're actually losing some instructional time per credit going to that fixed day. So I just thought it deserved mentioning, but.
Yeah. Any other questions? Do you want him to speak to it? Steve wants you to speak to it.
I'm glad to. Good evening, everybody. So on the current penciling of these schedules, including total instructional hours, taking away passing periods and such, if you look on the right-hand side of the screen, we have a total instructional hours per course per semester. Current penciling of that shows that the 7-period modified block as presented has about approximately 95 hours per course per semester, and the current 8-period modified block comes in at 69.24. Comparing that to the current schedules in place at Coeur d'Alene High School, at 98.03 for the 6-period day credit, total semester hours per course per semester, and the current AB block at Lake City High School at 72.
The math seems off on that. But I know you're a doctor, so I'll trust what you say.
I think we've already heard that doesn't always work well. And we also need to take into consideration collaboration time and such. Those types of situations and decisions will ultimately impact the numbers that you see on the screen as well.
Any other questions on this or move? Okay. How do I? Okay. So here's where we are. Our committee meets on Wednesday, and we hope to spend that entire time really developing this focus feedback process. If you're okay with us moving forward with those two schedules, we hope to really develop a robust opportunity for feedback and design and engagement with stakeholders, staff, students, community partners, K-Tech instructors, NIC representatives. So just really like a comprehensive mix of insight and feedback. And that would be in-person workshops, Q&A sessions, and then some, generalized survey responses. And then based on that feedback and insight and design work with those stakeholders, we hope to make any possible revisions or shifts in these models that best align with what's in alignment with the energy and interests and the best models for our community moving forward. And then based on what the feedback is too, we would provide you guys with a comprehensive overview. And here's everything that we've transpired. Here's some shifts that were made. Or here's how, what we're sticking with, much more detailed elements around numbers and cost, much more detailed around instructional minutes, advisory components, all of that stuff, right? Like a real comprehensive package and the directions of how this package came to be based on those feedback sessions and insight. And then we would be able to have a proposal presented to you for adoption for a schedule moving forward.
Real quick, I'd just like to thank Dr. Nelson. A couple weeks ago, we asked for a pretty extensive list of data, and he was able to put that together in a pretty easy format for us to view, and I think it made it into today's packet. Dr. Nichols, can you tell us, how was that used, or is that data being used and being considered at all by the schedule committee?
Yeah, we shared it with the schedule committee in small groups, and we didn't formally review it as a comprehensive group, so those small groups had the opportunity to dig into it as much or as little as they wanted. As you know, that data is comparing two models that both were not necessarily moving forward with. But it is important for us to look at, what are the key outcomes and opportunities within the two schedules that we have and things we can work on that we can build upon in an improved way and keep because it's working in our systems right now. So that data will be useful for us to reference.
Yeah, I guess, one of my concerns all along has been just in that change in instructional minutes, and I guess do minutes matter? And, certainly looking at the data, it makes you wonder if they do matter. And I know there's lots of variables, and I guess it just concerns me that we're just looking at models that reduce minutes, even potentially more than they currently are. So I hope that's consideration of the group, of the schedule committee.
Yeah, and I'm happy also to share some research with the committee and with you all about when you look at the impacts and outcomes of schedules and results and how much do minutes matter or not in that outcome for data, for student achievement and completion and all of that too. So then we can have, a robust conversation around that.
Right, and then I think the other thing that is impactful for me, at least in some of the data, is I think we all agree we want to offer more opportunity for our students to explore beyond the core kind of traditional classes, but finding that right balance and what is that number? And I think, some of it may just be what are approved courses, but when we see significant numbers of repeat courses or teacher aides and those sorts of things, those seem like just fill in space to me a little bit. And I just wonder if, when we talk about portrait of a graduate, are those the type of opportunities we're talking about? And is serving as a teacher aide, meaningful for that student? And it could be, but it could also not be, I guess. And so just you're finding that right balance of opportunity.
Yeah, Trustee Morrisroe, we are just starting the work around scrutinizing master schedules and ensuring that our schedules are representative of grade level coursework, high rigor, opportunities and access for students within alignment of our portrait of a graduate. Again, it doesn't really matter the model of the schedule so much as it matters the use of time and opportunity. I think, as you look at that timeline, if we're really prioritizing some of those key areas, it's going to shift the master schedule and what we're offering and how we're offering coursework for students to ensure that they have all the opportunities and access to meet those requirements. And then I think we're also really focusing on tiered systems of support that would also impact elements of like repeat courses and hopefully improve failure rates and all of those things that aren't necessarily schedule related. That's just instructional efforts and interventions to ensure that students are learning at a high level and successful the first time around.
I was wondering too, I know before we send this out to the community has done a lot of work, but the teachers at large, haven't heard their voice as much as I guess I wish we could. And I think it's important that we touch base with them before we send this out to the community. And specifically because these are so different, and they will be probably the most different for CHS and that staff as far as daily contact. So if we could hear from both schools just about their philosophy in teaching and if daily contact's important to them, or, I've heard a lot about the block schedule and the opportunities that it creates. I haven't heard as much about if there is passion or commitment to frequency in seeing students. So I know CHS has done some surveying of their staff. We haven't seen that yet. Is it possible to share that? And then Lake City too, Deanna, if your staff, we've heard from some, but if there's even more, if we could have that before we kind of get to the next stage, it would just help as we're processing all this information and moving forward, and maybe create ideas on how we can package it for the community.
Yeah, so that's a good point, Trustee May. One of the things I was thinking about when we get together on Wednesday is to think about like a scaffolded approach of like tiered outreach. So would we start with staff and students, and then based on that feedback, would that shift what we would share out for public stakeholder feedback? And then how would we kind of scaffold the public outreach, like general public, or would we start with community partners, or what, so that will be something that we'll talk about as a committee of how we want to share that information. I think we can share the previous survey feedback, and we can then again start with teacher and student feedback in our first outreach for that focused process, and then have that shared with you immediately too.
Yeah, I think they're the professionals, content experts, and so we should definitely know how they're feeling about this.
Yeah.
And if there's a way they think they can perform the best, I would appreciate it.
Yeah.
Okay, I have a lot.
Okay.
So just interrupt me if somebody wants to jump in. So I wanted to address some of Casey's comments, Trustee Morris-Rowe's comments. I think it is shocking when you see the distinction between the two numbers, but then you have to remember that you're bringing in a whole nother class every single day. And so in the same number of minutes. So when you're bringing in another entire class within the day with the same number of days, you're obviously going to have less instructional time. And so the question becomes, is there such a distinction in what we're seeing through each school that you're going to take a schedule and say, well, that's why, or is it really a matter of proper use of those minutes? And if it's about, opportunity for kids, which we know has been a huge part of the block's success and what parents and students and teachers talk about, then you really are going to have to come down to a prioritization. Is it pure minutes in the classroom, or is it opportunity and then how those classroom minutes are being used? I also wanted to mention that part of what some of these statistics, I think, within the comparisons between the two schools don't consider that one of the high schools had an opportunity to pilot integrated math a full year before the other high school. And we have no idea what the implications of that could be or what the outcomes of that could be. But I think when you're talking about an entirely new program that is supposed to be better for kids being piloted by one high school and not by the other, I think it's difficult to make true comparisons. And then, the TA issue and some of the types of use by kids of their scheduling, I think, again, one, you have to remember they only get to do that for 2 semesters. So you have 3 years of their high school career that they're not utilizing that, as well as sometimes there just aren't the options they want to be available, and then they can take advantage of those opportunities to be in the classroom and learn things that maybe they hadn't. I don't necessarily think that TA is like a non-starter and not necessarily beneficial to kids. Otherwise, why would we have it as a potential for kids? And so I think you have to look at those opportunities. Are they bad, or are they just being utilized because they are that beneficial to kids? And so that brings me to some of my questions. So those are just my comments in terms of, but I'm very curious about the pros and cons, and I don't know how much the committee had the opportunity to really dig into. I saw the key wonderings, and so I can see some of the cons potentially, but I wanted to know, how are those going to be developed to then put out to our stakeholders? What are the pros and cons of each of these? Because right now, if you asked me to look at these two schedules and say, which would you vote for, which would you recommend, I just don't feel like I know enough about either one. And I think the folks then, so how is that going to be developed?
Yeah.
Kelly? How do we get there? And you have a consensus on that? Because I know there was some struggles when the last survey went out of how each schedule was presented. Mm-hmm. So how do we have a consensus, or who's in charge of that?
Yeah, the committee's in charge of what information we present. And I don't think we would put anything out blatantly around pro or con, or not pro or con, like which one do you like better, before really doing some information sessions and thinking through and ask those preferences with people who have a full understanding of the entire schedule options. So like, unlike the first round of feedback where it was just kind of like, just taking a look at a trimester or rolling AB, like, what do you guys think? What are some questions you have? Which is just general feedback. This focus feedback is going to be far more intensive, right? Here, like you're going to go through a workshop. Let's break down every single element of these schedules. Here's some things that we're grappling with. We did this last week. Here was where the stakeholders thought about it last week. What do you guys think about it this week? So it's a pretty comprehensive process. What will be shared and how that will be organized is up to the committee. So that's what we're going to start on the 19th. And again, even scaffolding who would be presented to when, and then if we would revise things before going out to another group. So all of that is kind of to be determined. But I don't know if we'll ever get to a full consensus in that committee, but I think we'll definitely ensure that we have a shared understanding and a collective effort in creating all of the resources and the facilitation. So it's not just me or someone from central office that's going to share this. The committees are facilitating these workshops, committee members. So we have to make sure we're all on the same page and understand the work so that we can facilitate those conversations and gather that feedback and make those changes collectively.
And it would strike me that you would probably have an advocate for the 7-period block and an advocate for the 8-period with a anchored day, that they would each be present and then presenting sort of from their own perspectives if they would, or at least have somebody that's going to advocate for one of those schedules, not necessarily one person. I don't know. I'm just floating ideas, I guess. And then my next question, though, along those lines is, do you have a timeline for when these workshops and the Q&A sessions would start happening?
Well, in a perfect world, they'd happen within a week or so. What those parts will be are to be determined. But as you can see, there's a lot of work ahead for us that we'll have to establish as a committee of what components they want to make sure are part of the process, how much time they want in between, availability, what people will be involved. So that's I can't give you any tight type of timeline or deadline for this work, because the committee will really have to establish that when we meet on Wednesday.
Is that something you can bring back to us in June?
Oh, absolutely.
Okay,
Yeah.
perfect. Same question then for sort of the overview to the trustees before formalizing a proposal. I'm not sure how that fits in before having an actual schedule proposal for a board decision. So can you explain the difference between those two?
Yeah, the way I'm imagining it right now is just an overview of the process. Here's how we got to these particular schedules, so that you understood the whole context and what transpired and how we've come to the place that we've come. And that's just an overview, just for your information. And then sometimes this work has happened where we go in really strong on two schedules, and it becomes very apparent after multiple rounds of feedback and discernment that there's really just one that stands out. We might come to you with two, like the overview of both schedules, but only propose one for consideration. We might still have two. We don't know. Like, that process, I think, is to be determined based on that feedback and where the energy is in our community. So that's why we might not need it at all and just feel really confident about both and want to give them both to you. You might just say, don't give us one. We want both. All of that is to, that could be changed. But the way that I'm presenting it right now is, here's a process check and here's how you can see where we've landed. And then there would be a formal proposal process, possibly like with a recommendation from the committee.
Chair Brumley, I'm wondering if it would be valuable for the committee or Dr. Nichols to present back in June, not only here's a list of essentially the talking points of the two different schedules. Here are the questions that we'd like to go ask our staff. Here are the questions that we would like to go. It's not going to be the same survey, because it's two completely different contexts for internal and external. And both your questions and Trustee May's question gave me a little pause in that if that's information that the board wants, we shouldn't be going forward into the system with that until the committee's had a chance to talk those through and then bring that material back to the board to have an informed discussion with the board before we would go public with any kind of survey at this point. It strikes me that that's a really good opportunity for dialogue, and I think it would add depth to both your comments and Trustee Morris Rose I think, questions and kind of comments as well, because an information sheet on both of those schedules that had comparables that would give the data on, what would be, for example, minutes in this schedule, opportunities for electives, number of slots that would be necessary for filling out a graduation appropriate schedule with the appropriate number of graduation requirements. And I think all of those things as an informational kind of list underneath them, and then questions that would align to that, might make a lot of sense. I think there's a piece here that might be missing that I think is a really completely different topic, and that's a conversation that probably would be a good follow-up that would come out of the curricular department, which is the vetting of courses as they go into a master schedule. Dr. Nichols mentioned earlier that there's a threshold, an expectation that's established for what those courses must meet to be able to be considered for rigor and engagement and the amount of material that they're going to be covering. And that process would help filter out if there are classes currently now in our master schedule at any of our high schools that maybe wouldn't stand up to scrutiny. And I think, to me, those processes need to be separated, because the schedule is not indicative of the level of rigor in those classes. I think those classes need to be vetted on their own accord, whatever schedule that was being developed or implemented by the district. And I think separating that right off the bat could be a really important piece to start with.
Yeah, and Dr. Cook, I think to piggyback on that and kind of what Jen was mentioning, to me, as the committee's done their work, one piece of the conversation that I haven't seen emerge yet, and Tambra, feel free to chime in, is that we talk a lot about opportunities and making sure that we have equity and opportunities, but it seems to me like there's a lot of confusion over core content subjects that we know we have to teach, that we have an obligation to the community, that our students must be career, college prepared. That comes through a lot of core content subjects. The state tells us what we have to report. Dr. Nelson, puts this data together, but then the separate conversation is access to opportunities. And so as a board, I think it's threading that needle is how many opportunities are the right number of opportunities, and that's kind of what we're debating in these schedules. One thing we know we're always gonna have to do is core content. And so I haven't heard anybody have a conversation about how are we most effective in teaching core content subjects. And I think that's maybe what Trustee Morrisroe was getting at. Is it through minutes per course or per credit? I haven't heard anybody provide any, and that's why I said I want information from CHS and Lake City, because it's very different, their approach in teaching these core content subjects. And is there value in hearing what our staff has to say? And is any of that reflective in the data? I don't know. And I think that's part of what you were saying, Dr. Cook, about we haven't really dug into that piece of the conversation yet. But I think it's an important piece, because we all want to increase opportunities, but we all also want to ensure that our students are solid in their core content subjects. And so I don't know how we include that in possibly the committee work or feedback from staff, but I know our community is going to ask us that question, and I just wouldn't have the answer for them. I want to clarify something, Jen, that you said. There wasn't one school that trialed integrated math for an entire year. There was select classrooms, and so I don't want to misrepresent that an entire school was exposed to an integrated math program prior to it going live. And Dr. Nelson could speak to that more, but I think that's an important piece. I don't know that there was inequity in curriculum provided to each school. It was a mess in itself. And
equity, I was just inferring the comparison of the two schools with
Yeah.
that happening, but I thought it was the entire school.
No, and I think that what was being taught at CHS was a couple classes, and what was being taught has completely changed through our audit on integrated math. And so I'd be really careful telling the community that one school had access to integrated math prior to the other, because I don't think that's true.
So Trustee May, I hear your question, and I want to clarify that I'm hearing it correctly, as what's the best ways to teach core content or high instructional, methods and models. That's our instructional framework. That is not schedule dependent. I think there are schedule models that are more accessible within our instructional framework, but I appreciate Dr. Cook really creating this clear delineation. As our schedule committee is tasked with how do we create a container of time that provides the most opportunity and access for high quality outcomes for our students. That's the container of time. That's just the schedule. The other bigger questions that we're asking about the quality and outcomes, instructional experiences, teaching and learning, all of that, that's curricular and instruction. And that is something we're working on clearly in our strategic plan. And that's going to happen no matter what the schedule is, right? So when I'm thinking through our committee work, we're not trying to sell what schedule will produce the highest instructional outcomes. Good high quality teaching and learning is going to produce high instructional outcomes. What we're looking for is feedback on what are the best containers of time to provide access for our students to have a meaningful high school learning experience.
Right, I totally agree, but I think an important piece in that conversation, and we're getting lots of feedback from our community on how we've been performing during the last 18 months, because it's been a challenging 2 months. And there is a piece of our community who doesn't think it's our duty or obligation to provide access to as many opportunities. It's our duty and obligation to ensure our students are prepared to go on to the next level. And so we haven't asked our community about that. And I think it's kind of always, it's not fully understood the difference between the two. And so I'll be curious when that does emerge into the community, what will be their perspective? Because it does cost more money, the more access to opportunities that you provide. And I think it's a larger conversation, that what is our obligation as trustees and as a public school to provide opportunities. And we haven't delineated that yet, and I think there's feelings on both sides, and I'm unsure on
Yeah, well, and it's a worthy conversation. Both conversations are very worthy, and I think, as we really roll out our school learning plans and our instructional framework and have these clear outcomes around portrait or graduate and student-led conferencing, our community is going to know real well at a granular level what kind of practices are happening in our classrooms and what students are learning and benefiting from. And I think there's a lot of research out there in workforce development and in college and universities that are helping inform us as we're all transitioning after this, year of pandemic. And then what does that mean, and how are we considering our future focused work is truly focused on what's ahead for our students and not what we've known it to be.
Going back to something you said, Dr. Cook, a few minutes ago, I think it would be wise to come back to us at June before we go public with that. Just thinking back a few months ago, when we surveyed kind of before the board had seen it, and I think the board was also scratching their heads a little bit, like, what are we doing here? So I think it makes a lot of sense to talk about this one more time before we go public with something in a survey format.
I want to clarify a point. It sounds to me like what we're seeking is, and I don't know if we want to call them pro and cons of each schedule, or if we would just want to call, here's some informative points on each version of the schedule. Here are the minutes in a class period for each schedule. Here are and really what it is a comparison of what each schedule offers, so that we can dial in on those specifics as it relates to core classes, as it relates to electives, as it relates to minutes per class, as it relates to opportunities for kids to deviate outside of a particular pathway so that they could try something else on for size. So that it really is side by side, you're comparing what each of these schedules would have to offer, and then bring that to the board along with some possible questions or survey questions to ask both internally and externally, so that we could start to build a data set and some feedback on both of those things. But really get it away from considerations of what high school is running what, just these are those two schedules and the strengths of each of the schedules, or the weaknesses, pros or cons, or just information to the extent that, I think the memo that Dr. Nelson made had some data on it that kind of informed, and how those relate to required courses for graduation, whether or not the board does want to consider reducing those, or just taking the recommendation of staff, which is we give pathways to waivers for students that want to take something besides those classes. To me, I think that's the next step. I think would we like to have the process moving along? I think that is good, but I also think that this board has a lot invested in this conversation and needs to be very, very clear on what it is that they're standing next to when they hold it up and say, this is what I think is the right reason or the right thing for our community to do moving forward. And I think that's a really important conversation, to not have mistakes and know exactly what you're standing up for when you say those things. And so I think let us spend some time getting that data set built for these two schedules, and then providing you with some guidance, and we can even run some draft questions for both internal and external constituents to the board, and try to have that back to you ready for the June meeting.
And Dr. Cook, could you also include in there the financial impacts? I know Katie came and gave a really good presentation to the committee, but the board at large hasn't seen that. If we adopted either one of these schedules, it would be a financial impact to the district. And I think Kelly made a really good point. There's going to be professional development required, whatever schedule we adopt, to do well. So in that recommendation or information, could we have professional development cost, each schedule cost laid out, because we're going to have to we're going to have to make some priorities. And so I think we need to go into it when we go to the community, what that looks like.
And really quick, I think Dr. Nelson, I don't think because I think the memorandum just went to the scheduling committee, so it'd be helpful if we could all receive that memorandum. And then Dr. Nichols, earlier you mentioned just educating us maybe a little bit more fully on hours and impacts. We talked about that earlier. If you could that would be really helpful.
Yeah,
I'd like to understand that more fully.
Yeah, I'm in my board notes to you last on Friday, I shared, and I can get into some more specifics, but there is some good research about high performing outcomes around high schools that detail that kind of stuff.
Yeah,
so
the
we can
advisory
engage.
stuff within that was really helpful just to understand what advisory
Yeah.
even fully means. I appreciated that. So.
Okay, so we'll be back in touch in June, and the journey continues. Thank you all.
Well, thank you very much, Dr. Nichols, and thank you to your committee and all the time, and congratulations to the committee on coming together and bringing us two schedules. I was so excited when I opened up the board book and I was like, ah! So that was awesome, and I just look forward to seeing some more good stuff coming out of there.
Thank you.
Thanks. All right, on to our last topic of the evening for information action is collaboration.
Thank you, Chair Bromley. I think I think Seth is going to be at least the point person on this particular conversation. He's going to share some data, some interesting data, as a matter of fact, on how the feedback has gone with collaboration conversation. If you recall, and it might even be complicated by our last conversation if we wind up in some kind of schedule where we're going to have to figure some kind of modifications on some of those days. So we'll figure that piece out when we get there. But this is a good place for us to start. So I'll turn it over to Seth at this point.
Thank you, Dr. Cook, Chair Brumley, members of the board. As you might know, prior to 2010, we had collaboration time introduced in our district after some extensive surveying and communication with our community and our staff and our students. Since that time, collaboration happened always on Monday morning, so it's always had been a late start until this year when we had to move it to Wednesdays because of our hybrid schedule to start the year off. So because of that, we wanted to know what our staff and our students and families said was best. So first we started off by surveying all of our staff. We got about 500 responses, and staff could only respond once. The full results of that survey are in your packet, and that includes all the comments. From those survey results, the top four choices were about 35% in favor of Friday afternoon early release, about 25% in favor of Wednesday morning late start, roughly 19% in favor of Wednesday afternoon early release, and then 14% in favor of moving it back to a Monday morning late start. Then we took those top three options and went to our students, our parents, and the community at large. Those survey results were fairly similar, about 72% Friday afternoon early release, so that was by far the most popular one. About 24% Wednesday morning late start, and then 4.5% for Wednesday afternoon early release. Again, your packet should have all the survey results, all the broken out data, as well as the comments. And there was quite a few comments that came from our community as well. regardless of what our decision is, I think one thing that was clear to me was that we need to do a really good job of publicizing what we're using that time for, because I think as you talk to buildings, they'll tell you how key it is to moving our strategic plan and things like the portrait of a graduate, even simple things like this last year, COVID protocols and blended learning, how they couldn't have done those massive shifts without some of that professional development time. So I think in reading through some of the comments, it's pretty clear that we need to do a really good job publicizing how we're using some of that time. So because of the timing and the number of decisions that we have, our recommendation as instructional core is to keep collaboration on Wednesday mornings for now. I think if the board desires to move collaboration to Friday afternoon, we would want some time to research that and really fully vet how we would do that. On the second page of that memo, you can see a pro and con chart for each of the 3 options that were presented to the public. I think one thing with Friday afternoon is there's just a lot of cons there, and that was part of why we didn't feel comfortable recommending it at this time without some more time to plan. With so many schedule changes potentially up in the air, whether it's the high school bell schedules that Dr. Nichols just talked about, or even the school start times that the committee recommended 2 years ago or a year and a half ago, flipping elementary and secondary start times. There's just so much unknown when it comes to schedules, and so I think it would make sense if it's the board's desire to move to Fridays that this change happen in conjunction with those changes as well. So with that, I'll stand for any questions you might have, and of course we have our whole team here as well if you've got anything I can answer.
I just had a quick question about the Monday collaboration late start. I know that didn't get sent out to parents, but the feedback, we kind of all got a lot of feedback that they wish that had been an option. Wednesdays seems like it's a real issue for childcare for working parents. So I do worry if 71% wanted Friday afternoon, only 23.9 said Wednesday morning. Would we be providing childcare for our K-5, K students that can't be left alone in the morning, or?
Are you talking about for Wednesday morning?
Yeah, for Wednesday.
I'm not aware that we would be changing anything that we don't already have.
I do worry that we'd just be putting our parents in a pickle, and I don't know that I'm comfortable with that, but.
I guess my comments, I noticed all the Monday morning late start. I'd be very interested in knowing an outcome of Monday morning versus Friday afternoon and how parents might see that. I did the survey. I was one of the Friday afternoon parents because I have an elementary age student that I have childcare issues with my job. And it's much easier for me to start early on a Friday afternoon than it is or provide care on a Friday afternoon. So I understand where that's coming from, and I really struggle not hearing 70% of our respondents. And so I would be very interested in the further research, but I also don't like pushing that, like starting it next year with, keeping the Wednesdays and not really pushing this to have a decision on Fridays or Wednesdays before the start of the next school year. And then I know that there's been some comment about Friday afternoons and how our teachers might utilize that time, and I agree, but I have the utmost respect and I fully expect that the professionals that we've hired are going to do the right thing on Friday afternoons if that's what we do. I can't imagine just assuming that it's not going to be effective for our teachers, especially when they too, although not with the same overwhelming majority, wanted to look at it being a Friday afternoon. The one other thing I would say about the afternoon piece, whether it was the Wednesday afternoon or the Friday afternoon that was being contemplated, is I think that having that little extra buffer at the end of the school day that allows for continued time if people want to continue talking about a topic, to do a wrap up. You can't do that in the mornings when you have a classroom filling up with kids that you have to get back to. True. So I really liked the afternoon option on either day, just for that, some flexibility and some ability to maybe get a little bit more collaboration time if needed on those days. So those are my thoughts, I guess. I don't have a final decision made on it, but those are my thoughts.
Right.
I worry about the Friday afternoons for our coaches. We have a lot of coaches that tend to coach multiple sports, and there's a lot of Friday afternoons where they're gone, so they would be missing valuable professional development time or collaboration time. So to me, that's a concern, and how would they be making that time up? And I would like to see a comparison between Monday mornings and Wednesday mornings with staff and families, because there were a lot of comments about not having the option for Monday morning late start.
It's about 200 comments that mentioned Monday morning on
Yeah,
the staff.
so to me, I
parent
just,
side.
Friday afternoons sound nice, but I also think that's a lot of missed time for our staff that coach multiple sports throughout the year. I mean, they would basically, some of them would be missing every Friday afternoon. And to me, that's valuable time, you know, that we're trying to provide for our staff in this training. So I don't see how they'd be able to make that up, you know, with everything else that they have on their plate. So I personally would like to see something maybe going out with Monday late start and Wednesday.
You mean to the community?
Yeah, there were
staff?
a lot of comments
Yeah.
that stuck out to me, and so
Yeah, I mean, keep in mind there was about 3,000 responses and only 200 mentioned Monday in the comments.
yeah.
Also, Monday morning was pretty clearly the fourth choice among staff, and many of them mentioned in their comments how hard Monday mornings were to just get ready for the week after having that professional development time. So I agree, it's really challenging reading through all those comments. I summarized them as best I could in this pro and con chart. I don't think it's a clear-cut, easy decision. But I think if it's the board's desire to move to Friday afternoon, we're just requesting a little bit of time to figure out how to address all of these cons and make sure that we have a plan for each one of those if that's your
I
desire.
was curious if there was a reason why K-12 had to be uniform. I mean, I think we know that high school, our coaches are high school teachers, and we know that students need help after high school, either making up a test or getting help before a test. So afternoons for high school staff are more difficult. Elementary K-5, however, I think it's easier on a Friday afternoon to find childcare. So is there a reason why we couldn't have K-5 focus on an afternoon, and high school where we know, our staff, that our coaches are always going to be busy Monday through Friday? Essentially, there's games all days of the week. Is there a day maybe focusing on morning for them midweek on a Wednesday? Because a lot of high schoolers get themselves to school or can take the bus and would probably be better off with an extra hour of sleep. I don't know. I just thought maybe we could meet needs better if we broke those two up. And I don't know where middle school would fit in that, but I think high school has its own set of circumstances and K-5 has another. So thoughts on that?
I am curious if you've reached out to Sorensen at all, who's had Friday collaboration early release for years. And so I bet that they could probably speak into what's worked well and what hasn't, because they, as a school, start earlier. At Sorensen, they've let out students at 2:00 and have had that professional development time. So we could probably gain some insight from them of what works and what doesn't. And
Yeah, I actually did the majority of my teaching career in a district that did Friday early release. And it tended to work well, but I do think you need some clear parameters around it. So,
For me, I think as a parent, for Friday afternoons make a lot of sense. I just wonder, the same concerns you have there. How do we make that useful time? And it's the end of the week, and there's lots of things going on. And I agree. I think if we're waiting on something like that, I think I'd like to see, is it Monday morning or Wednesday morning that's preferred? If it's okay, afternoons are out for right now, we can't pull that off. We're going to look at mornings. Is it Monday or Wednesday? Because it seems to me a lot of the comments said Wednesdays were just difficult, particularly at the younger age. So I think at least my high schooler, and my middle schooler, they like Wednesdays because they get to
Yeah,
sleep in
ours
an hour.
too. Yeah, ours liked Wednesdays as well, but they're also older.
Yeah.
So they like the middle of the week. So
Yeah.
I
I like Trustee May's idea of splitting it. I think it's I'm just curious what Cabinet or Dr. Cook think.
My first thought is that many of our families have kids and we just gave them multiple burdens because now they've got to solve a day for their younger kid and a day for their older kid.
And it may be, older brother or sister is the one going to pick up, or, I guess it doesn't work on drop off, but on a pickup it could work, right, in an afternoon. Right.
afternoon would
Yeah, transportation would be another issue
Yeah.
as well.
Actually, I think what I heard that made the most sense for the next step, one of the things that this team has spent a lot of time on is Friday afternoons is a big shift. If we want to go that direction over time, give this team a little bit of time to think about that. And in the meantime, the most probably prudent step would be, okay, we communicate to that extent. We're investigating what it would look like to go to Friday as a permanent fix. But in the meantime, what makes more sense, either Monday morning or Wednesday morning as a preliminary? We're going to survey the community on, okay, we're going to do Friday, but it needs a minute. And so therefore, would you prefer Monday morning or Wednesday morning until we got Fridays? Is that agreed upon? Is that a general direction?
I'm still a little uncomfortable with Fridays. I think just the perception in the community is that it's just a free time, day off, and people are taking vacation. It's on a Friday. So how many of those collaborations are you going to have your full staff available? And I think the coaching for high school would be a big deal. Our high school coaches are doing double duty, and they are working their tails off. So they're going to be missing a lot. I would want to know some data on a survey from high school teachers, what % they would be able to attend in the afternoons. I can see it being difficult during football season, soccer season, all sports seasons.
So maybe Chair Brumley, maybe we go back to our recommendation and just see if that's dead on arrival. See what the board's wishes are on that, and then maybe some guidance on that.
Well, I guess the question, I would be calling the question, and I think what Dr. Cook is asking is there a motion to adopt the recommendation, or is there a different motion with regards to moving forward?
Thank you. Exactly what I'm after.
And I will just say again, I said this in my comments, but I struggle ignoring the outcomes of the survey and just saying we're not going to do it when you had such an overwhelming, both staff and parents. And so I like the idea that Dr. Cook said, which is, we can say, yes, we're looking at this further. And it may be that we ultimately come to the conclusion with coaches and considerations. But I have to trust that our community is smart enough to know that when they're saying, yes, I want to do Friday release, I'm also recognizing that I'm putting teachers, on Friday afternoon doing collaboration, and trust that that's going to happen and that they're not going to, with everything we've been through. So my preference is we send a survey back out to parents on Monday or Wednesday morning and bring this back maybe for a workshop in June, and that we would agree to have the Fridays vetted further. That's my thought.
I just wonder, I think it was based on what Seth said about the comments and kind of the lack of understanding potentially of what that time's used for, that if the community at large has a lack of knowledge of what the collaboration time's used for, it may be difficult for them to weigh in on that, right? And, I guess for me, like I said, I see the benefit of Friday as a parent. I'm concerned we're not there with all the changes we have going but I'm not sure, I'm not ready to make a recommendation to approve Wednesdays, because that, from what I've heard, more so from the survey, because Monday wasn't even on the survey, what I've heard is Monday is preferred, from the community, from parents I talk to, I guess, over Wednesdays, I think. And so I guess I would like to see that surveyed. If we can't do Fridays, afternoons, is it Monday or Wednesday?
Yeah, I agree too.
So do you want me to tidy that into a motion? Or is it just we all agreed?
Do you want a motion, or do you hear what we're saying?
Survey Monday versus Wednesday as a gap to figuring out Friday.
Fridays, yes. Fridays concerns.
Okay.
Yep.
Mike, you got the survey in your mind?
One question.
And is it, sorry, just one point of clarification. Are we just surveying students, parents in the community? Because staff, we have that data already. Or are we?
I think it would
wanting to
be,
more
I'd like to
specific?
see if we're just asking A or B, that we ask staff.
I'd like
again.
to know staff too, just between those options. So I think I would want to hear from everybody again.
And
In the
I don't know, are we okay if the communication's like, okay, we understand that the majority is supportive of Friday afternoons, but we have some issues we need to work through, and in the meantime, it's
Some deeper explanation as to the value of that time, because I am uncomfortable sending out a whole new survey to 3,000 people without some real clarity as to why they're answering this question again,
Right.
when they already said
right.
Fridays.
I think you could just list the cons that you put out there, Seth, and that as the beginning, that these are some of the things that came to the top when Friday became the most favored option that we need to vet and circulate to make sure that collaboration time is used the most efficiently. And in doing so, we need a stopgap while we investigate that. And so we're looking at the Mondays and Wednesdays. And what would you prefer as between those two options while we investigate further into developing a permanent plan with potential Friday afternoons?
Yeah, that makes sense. In the interest of time, can we try to get this out as soon as possible so you can see it at your June board meeting? Because I know many of our principals and other staff are waiting on us to decide this so that they can really plan out their next school year.
Yeah, if we think we can get it out and get responses
Okay.
and get it back, that would be great.
Yeah, we've been trying to do a minimum of a week for surveys like this. I mean, the fact that we got 500 staff responses, and that was only about in 5 days, and then 3,000 parent and student responses in a week, I think means people are engaged with this topic, obviously. So.
And when we're working at Friday, can we see how many Fridays we missed just with school being out? It seems like it's mostly Fridays, but if that would be impactful to staff, if they would miss out on those
And
days.
and that's an issue with Mondays as well, right? Because if you're gonna miss a day of school, it's typically Fridays or Mondays. Also, one other thing I wanted to bring up that I didn't get a chance to put in the pro and con list is, remember next year we move back to ADA as how we're funded. And one concern I would have with Fridays is it could result in significantly more absences. And so as you move back to average daily attendance as a way to get your funding, there could be a financial impact with having Friday early release. So that's just something to consider as well.
All right, anything else from board?
We're good.
All right. Well, thank you very much, Seth, and as well, Cabinet behind your survey and those that worked hard on that. Thank you for bringing that to the board, and we'll look forward to seeing all of you again. It looks like, well, 2 of our 3 topics back for our June board meeting. And if there's nothing else, we are adjourned.